I walked into my own living room and heard my name spoken with a cruelty I didn't recognize until I realized it was coming from the man I married. His voice was low, amused, sharp around the edges, like he was entertaining someone with a joke at my expense. "She's predictable," he said, leaning back on the couch like he owned the air in the room. "Always emotional, always needs reassurance. I swear, sometimes I feel like I'm parenting her instead of being married." I stopped moving. My hand was still on my purse strap. The front door hadn't even closed behind me yet. Another woman laughed softly, not nervously, not apologetically, comfortably. I stepped fully into the room then, letting my heels click against the hardwood floor. The sound cut through their conversation like glass shattering. They both turned. My husband froze first. His mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted, calculating, already measuring what kind of reaction he could use against me. He expected tears, yelling, a breakdown he could later twist into proof that I was unstable. Instead, I walked past them and sat down in the armchair across from the couch, calmly. The woman's reaction was immediate and completely different from his. Her face drained of color, her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in recognition, concern, something heavier. She knew me, and I knew her. My husband cleared his throat. "This isn't what it looks like." I crossed my legs slowly, resting my hands in my lap. "No," I said evenly, "it looks exactly like what it is." The silence stretched, thick, uncomfortable. The woman stood up, not toward me, but away from him. "I need to say something," she said, her voice steady but firm. "Right now." My husband scoffed, trying to recover his footing. "You're overreacting." She turned to him fully then, eyes sharp, posture unyielding. "No, what I'm doing is acknowledging that this situation violates every ethical boundary I uphold, professionally and personally." His face tightened. "What are you talking about?" She took a breath. "You're manipulative. You weaponize vulnerability. You distort narratives to maintain control. And seeing this confirms exactly what I warned about." The room felt smaller. I didn't say a word. She continued, "You don't just lie. You recruit people into your lies. And you don't love, you dominate." He laughed bitterly. "This is ridiculous." "No," she said quietly, "this is clarity." She turned to me. "I'm sorry. I should have recognized sooner that he wasn't just resistant to growth, he was committed to harm." My husband stood up abruptly. "You're both ganging up on me." She shook her head. "No one is attacking you. You're being seen." That's when his confidence cracked, because there's nothing more terrifying to a man like him than being described accurately, without emotion, without apology, without fear. She picked up her bag. "I can no longer treat you, and after tonight I will be documenting everything." She walked toward the door. I stood with her. As we stepped into the hallway together, she leaned close and whispered something that made my chest tighten, not with pain, but with power. "You weren't imagining it, and he knows that now." Behind us, my husband called my name, sharp, angry, desperate. I didn't turn around, because for the first time, the truth wasn't chasing me, it was cornering him. We didn't speak until we were halfway down the block. The night air felt sharper than usual, like it was scraping truth straight off my skin. My heartbeat finally caught up with me, not racing, just steady, deliberate. The kind of rhythm you get when something irreversible has happened. She stopped under a streetlight and turned toward me. Up close, I could see the conflict in her face. Not guilt exactly, but responsibility. The weight of someone who realizes they were standing too close to a fire and didn't move fast enough. "I need to be very clear," she said. "What happened tonight? It wasn't a lapse. It was a pattern confirming itself." I nodded. I know. Her eyes searched mine. Most people don't. They apologize for the behavior that was done to them. You didn't. I stopped apologizing a long time ago, I said quietly. I just didn't have language for what was happening. She exhaled, slow and controlled. That's how people like him survive. They exhaust you into self-doubt. They make you feel unstable for reacting normally to instability. We stood there in silence for a moment, the hum of distant traffic filling the space where excuses used to live. He told me you were fragile, that you misinterpreted things, that you created conflict where there was none. I laughed once soft, humorless. Of course he did. She met my gaze. That's why seeing you walk in tonight the way you did, it changed everything. You weren't fragile. You were composed, present, grounded. Back upstairs, I knew exactly what was happening. He was pacing, rewriting the story in his head, preparing a version of events where he was misunderstood, where I was dramatic, where she had crossed a line instead of him obliterating one. Men like him don't panic when they're caught cheating. They panic when the audience refuses to play their assigned roles. She adjusted the strap of her bag. I will be filing a formal ethical disclosure, not to punish him, but to protect future patients. People like him don't just hurt partners, they harm systems. Something loosened in my chest then. Not relief, validation. The quiet kind that doesn't need witnesses. Thank you, I said, for saying it out loud. She nodded. You already knew. I just confirmed it. When I went back upstairs alone, the apartment felt unfamiliar. Not because it had changed, but because I had. My husband stood in the living room, arms crossed, jaw tight. He looked like a man waiting to be reassured. Well, he snapped, are you done recruiting allies? I set my purse down slowly. She wasn't an ally. She was a mirror. He scoffed. You're really enjoying this, aren't you? No, I said calmly. I'm understanding it. His eyes narrowed. You think this makes you better than me? I think it makes me done, I replied. That's when his voice shifted, lower, edged with something dangerous. You're not leaving. You don't even know how the world works without me. I looked at him then. Really looked. The man who once felt larger than life now looked small, frantic, cornered by exposure. I walked in tonight expecting to feel humiliated. Instead, I feel free. His face hardened. You're making a mistake. No, I said softly. I'm ending one. As I went to pack a bag, he followed me down the hallway, his words tumbling over each other, apologies disguised as blame, affection laced with threat, promises that sounded suspiciously like warnings. I didn't respond, because something had shifted permanently. The most dangerous thing for a manipulator isn't confrontation, it's disengagement. And as I zipped my bag and reached for my coat, I realized something chilling. He wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of losing control over the story. And he wasn't finished trying to get it back. I didn't leave that night with drama or slammed doors. I left with a single overnight bag and the kind of calm that unnerves people who rely on chaos to feel powerful. He stood in the hallway watching me lace my boots, his silence louder than any insult he could have thrown. You'll be back, he said finally, voice flat. Not hopeful, certain. I looked up at him. No, I replied, I won't. That certainty wavered for just a second, not enough for him to admit fear, but enough for me to see it. I stayed with my sister that night. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need the story. She just handed me a mug of tea and said, "You can breathe here." And for the first time in months, I did. The next morning, my phone lit up. Not apologies, corrections. He texted like a man editing a draft he refused to discard. You embarrassed me last night. She manipulated you. You made us look unstable. We should talk before you ruin everything. I didn't respond. By noon, the messages shifted tone. I miss you. I didn't mean it like that. You know how I get when I'm stressed. You're overthinking. I still didn't respond. Silence does something interesting to people who thrive on control. It forces them to sit with themselves, and most of them can't stand the company. By the third day, he tried a new angle. He showed up at my job. Not loudly, not aggressively, casually, like a coincidence he wanted me to feel grateful for. He leaned against the reception desk, smiling at the woman behind it like he was charming his way into someone else's narrative. When I stepped out of the elevator and saw him, I didn't flinch. He did. "Hey," he said too softly. "Can we talk?" I looked at the receptionist. "Can you give us a minute?" She hesitated, then nodded and stepped away. "This isn't appropriate," I said calmly. He chuckled under his breath. "See, this is what I'm talking about. You're turning everything into a crisis." I folded my arms. "You came to my workplace uninvited. That's not normal." He leaned closer. "I came because you won't answer your phone. That's intentional." His jaw tightened. "You don't get to shut me out." I held his gaze. "Watch me." For a moment, his mask slipped, just enough for the edge to show. "You think you won because she sided with you?" he whispered. "She doesn't know you like I do. And you don't know me at all." That landed harder than any accusation. He straightened, scanning the lobby, suddenly aware of eyes on us. "You're making a mistake listening to outsiders." "She wasn't an outsider," I replied. "She was a professional who recognized a pattern, the same pattern I lived with." His voice dropped. "You're really going to destroy our marriage over this?" I didn't raise my voice. "You destroyed it the moment you stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as something to manage." Security cleared his throat nearby, a quiet reminder that this space wasn't his anymore. He stepped back, offended. "You've changed." "Yes," I said. "That's the point." He left with his head high, but his steps were uneven, and as the elevator doors closed behind me, I felt it, the subtle but undeniable shift. He was losing access. That night, as I lay in my sister's guest room staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed one last time. A message from an unknown number. "You did the right thing, but be careful. People like him don't let go quietly." My chest tightened. I stared at the screen, a familiar intuition stirring, the same one I ignored for too long. This wasn't over, not because I doubted myself, but because I knew him, and men who lose control don't seek closure. They seek leverage. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I missed him, but because my body was finally catching up to what my mind had already accepted. Danger doesn't always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it arrives disguised as familiarity. The next morning, my sister left early for work. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that invites reflection whether you want it or not. I stood in the bathroom brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed again. A voicemail. From him. I didn't open it right away. I stared at the notification like it was a live wire. Something in my gut told me this message would be different. Not apologetic, not defensive. Strategic. I pressed play. His voice came through calm, almost soothing. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, "about how things ended, about how we both made mistakes." I closed my eyes. "I know you feel validated right now," he continued, "but you should know people are asking questions about you, about us." That made my stomach drop. "I didn't say anything bad," he added quickly. "I just told them the truth, that you've been under a lot of stress, that you've been influenced, that you're not yourself lately." My grip tightened around the phone. "And the therapist," he said with a faint laugh, "she really crossed a line. Professionals talk. You'd be surprised how fast reputations shift when stories start circulating." The message ended there. No threat, no demand, just implication. I stood frozen, toothbrush still in my hand, heart pounding, not with fear, but with recognition. This was his favorite tactic. He didn't need to destroy you directly. He just needed to suggest you were unstable and let others do the rest. By noon, it started. A coworker stopped by my desk, voice cautious. "Hey, are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said. She hesitated. "I just heard—" "Never mind." Another email came in, this one from HR. Polite, neutral, requesting a check-in conversation later that week. I felt it then, the slow tightening of a net. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was about containment. He couldn't control me privately anymore, so he was repositioning the narrative publicly, painting concern where there was sabotage, framing care where there was punishment. That afternoon, I stepped outside my office building and called the one person who had already seen through him. She answered on the second ring. "I was hoping you'd call," his former therapist said quietly. "Something's happening. He's planting doubts." She didn't sound surprised. "That's escalation, and it confirms what I documented." "Documented?" I repeated. "Yes," she said. "What you witnessed wasn't just unethical, it was reportable. I've already submitted my notes to the board. They may reach out to you." My chest tightened, not with fear, but with the weight of what that meant. "If they do," she continued, "tell the truth. Don't soften it. Don't protect him." I exhaled slowly. "He's trying to make me look unstable." She paused. "That's because stability is the one thing he can't argue with, and it terrifies him." When the call ended, I sat on a bench outside watching people pass by, each one carrying their own invisible battles. I wondered how many of them were being quietly dismantled by someone they loved. That evening, as I returned to my sister's house, something felt off. The porch light was on, but she never left it on during the day. I slowed my steps. The front door was unlocked. My heart began to race. Inside, everything looked normal at first glance, too normal. Then I saw it. An envelope on the kitchen counter, my name written across the front in his handwriting. I didn't open it. I didn't need to, because whatever he had put inside wasn't meant to communicate. It was meant to intimidate. And standing there, in a space that was supposed to be safe, I realized something chilling. He wasn't trying to win me back. He was trying to remind me that he could still reach me. I stood in my sister's kitchen for a long moment, staring at that envelope like it might start breathing if I got too close. My name looked different in his handwriting now, less familiar, more invasive, like a fingerprint left somewhere it didn't belong. I didn't open it. Instead, I took a picture of it with my phone, front, back, close-up of the handwriting. The return address wasn't written, but that didn't matter. The message wasn't inside the envelope. The message was that he had been here. I locked the door behind me and walked through the house slowly, checking rooms, windows, the back entrance. Everything was intact, no signs of force, no mess. That was the point. He wanted me to know he didn't need to break in. When my sister came home an hour later, I handed her the envelope without saying a word. Her jaw tightened instantly. "He came here?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "or someone on his behalf." She shook her head. "That's not okay." "No," I agreed. "It's deliberate." She wanted to throw it away, tear it up, burn it maybe, but I stopped her. "I need it," I said, "not because of what's written inside, but because of what it proves." That night, I finally listened to the voicemail again, not as his wife, not even as his victim, as a witness. The tone, the phrasing, the careful suggestion that people were questioning my stability, the subtle threat disguised as concern. I saved it, backed it up, labeled it. For the first time, I wasn't reacting, I was documenting. The next morning, I got an email from the licensing board, polite, formal, requesting a statement regarding an observed boundary violation involving a licensed professional. My hands were steady when I replied, "I'm available to speak, and I will be honest." At work, HR followed up too. I went into the meeting prepared, emails printed, dates noted, timelines clear. I didn't accuse, I didn't dramatize, I explained. "My marriage ended," I said calmly. "My husband is responding by attempting to undermine my credibility. This is not new behavior, it's a pattern." The HR manager listened carefully, asked measured questions, took notes. When she finished, she leaned back slightly. "Thank you for being clear," she said. "That helps." Clear. That word followed me out of the room like a shield. That evening, my phone buzzed again, a text from him. "I heard you've been talking to people. I don't think you understand how this could affect you." I stared at the screen, then typed one sentence, "Do not contact me again." I blocked the number. It felt final, not dramatic, just clean. Later that night, as I lay in bed, my body finally allowed the fear to surface, not panic, but awareness, the kind that sharpens your instincts instead of dulling them. I thought about something the therapist had said weeks ago, long before this all blew open. People who rely on control don't stop when exposed, she warned. They change tactics. And that's when it hit me. The envelope, the voicemail, the HR whisper campaign. Those weren't endings, they were tests. He was probing to see how far he could still go and whether I'd finally push back. My phone lit up once more, a message from an unfamiliar email address. No greeting, no signature, just one sentence. If he realizes he's losing the narrative, he'll escalate. I sat up slowly, my heart steady but alert, because deep down I knew the truth. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about power. And the most dangerous moment with someone like him is when they realize they no longer have it. I didn't reply to the anonymous email. I didn't forward it. I didn't even screenshot it right away. I just stared at the words until they settled into my bones, not as fear, but as confirmation, because I already felt it, the shift. The air around him had changed from wounded to dangerous, from reactive to deliberate. That morning, I did something I should have done years ago. I called a lawyer, not to threaten, not to posture, to prepare. She listened quietly as I explained everything. The affair, the therapist, the voicemail, the envelope, the subtle attempts to dismantle my credibility. When I finished, there was a pause on the line. "Your instincts are right," she said. "This isn't harassment yet. It's grooming the ground for it." Grooming. The word landed heavy. "He's trying to destabilize you socially and professionally," she continued. "That way, if he escalates later, your reactions can be reframed as proof of instability." I closed my eyes. "So what do I do?" "You stay boring," she said calmly. "Predictable, documented. You don't confront him, you outlast him." That sentence became my anchor. By the end of the week, the licensing board scheduled interviews. HR followed up with a written summary of our conversation. My sister installed a camera at the front door. I changed my routine slightly. Nothing drastic, just enough to notice who was paying attention. And he was paying attention. I knew because he stopped contacting me directly. Instead, mutual acquaintances started reaching out. "He's really struggling. He says you blindsided him. He doesn't understand why you're being so cold." cold. That word again, the favorite insult of men who mistake access for entitlement. Then came the apology letter. Not the envelope from my sister's kitchen, but an email, carefully written, emotionally literate, almost convincing. I've done a lot of reflection. I take responsibility for my actions. I think therapy revealed things I wasn't ready to face. I just want closure. Closure is a weapon when wielded by someone who never respected your boundaries. I forwarded the email to my lawyer and didn't respond. 2 days later, something else happened. I got a calendar notification I hadn't created. A shared reminder, still linked from when we were married. Dinner with friends, Friday, 7 p.m. My stomach tightened. Those friends weren't mutual anymore. They were his. People who believed the softened version of his story. People who thought I'd lost perspective. He wasn't inviting me. He was reminding me that he still had access to parts of my life I hadn't fully locked down. I deleted the calendar, changed passwords, updated security questions. That night, as I stepped out to take the trash to the curb, I noticed a car parked down the street longer than usual, engine off, lights dark. Maybe nothing, maybe something. I went back inside and locked the door. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Blocked number. I didn't answer. A voicemail followed. His voice came through strained but controlled. He said, "I know you're trying to disappear, but we share history. You can't erase that. And the more you push this narrative, the more people are going to question why." There it was. Not anger, not remorse, a warning. I saved the voicemail, labeled it, backed it up. And for the first time since I walked into that living room and heard myself being dismantled like a joke, I felt something new rise in me. Not fear, not grief, resolve. Because he wasn't escalating randomly. He was escalating because his tactics were failing. The therapist spoke, the board listened, HR documented, I stayed calm. And men like him don't unravel when they're attacked. They unravel when they're ignored and exposed. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, one thought echoed louder than all the rest. He wasn't trying to win me back. He was trying to force an emotional reaction he could use. But I wasn't going to give him one, because the quiet woman he underestimated was becoming the witness he couldn't silence. And I knew, deep in my chest, the next move wouldn't be subtle. The next move came disguised as concern. I knew it the moment my sister forwarded me the text. "Hey, just checking. Are you sure she's okay?" He sounded really worried, said she's been acting erratic and isolating herself. Erratic. Isolating. Words chosen carefully, words that didn't accuse outright, but planted doubt like seeds that could grow without him ever touching the soil again. "He's laying groundwork," my sister said quietly. "People don't check on you unless they've been told there's a reason to." She was right. Within 48 hours, the questions multiplied. A cousin asking if I was getting enough rest. A former coworker suggesting I talk to someone. A well-meaning friend saying, "I just hope you're not being influenced by outsiders." Outsiders. That's what truth sounds like to people who benefit from silence. I didn't correct them. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. I documented. Dates, names, language patterns. Because something else became clear. This wasn't about getting me back anymore. This was about discrediting me before I could fully step away. Then came the escalation I hadn't anticipated. A welfare check. I was in my apartment, alone, reading, when the knock came. Firm, official. I opened the door to 2 officers standing there, polite but alert. "Ma'am," one said, We received a call expressing concern about your well-being. My heart didn't race, it steadied. I'm fine, I said calmly. Who called? They exchanged a glance. A family member. Of course. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'd like this documented. That surprised them. Inside, I spoke clearly, slowly. I showed them my ID, my living space, my calendar, my notes. I didn't cry. I didn't joke. I didn't perform wellness. I embodied it. When they left, one officer paused at the door. For what it's worth, she said, this didn't feel like concern. No, I replied softly. It felt like control. As soon as the door closed, I sat down, not because I was shaken, but because something heavy had landed. He had crossed a line, and lines once crossed can't be uncrossed. I called my lawyer immediately. This just changed everything, she said after I explained. False wellness checks establish intent. Intent. That word turned the story from subjective to structural. Later that evening, I received a notification from the licensing board. The therapist's report had moved forward. Formal review, multiple witnesses, pattern established. I felt something loosen, not relief, but inevitability. He was losing control of the narrative he'd so carefully curated. And that's when the final message arrived. Not a call, not an email, a handwritten note slipped under my door. You're forcing my hand, it read. I never wanted it to get ugly. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with clarity. Because people who never wanted things to get ugly don't threaten ugliness unless they believe they're entitled to compliance. I folded the note carefully, took photos, logged it. Then I did something that would have terrified the woman I used to be. I smiled. Not because I was winning, but because I finally understood the game. He wasn't unraveling because he'd been exposed. He was unraveling because I refused to react. And now with the board involved, HR aware, police documentation started, and legal counsel prepared, he had no moves left that didn't leave fingerprints. Which meant whatever he tried next would no longer be quiet. And that's when accountability finally arrives, not with shouting, not with revenge, but with light. And I knew, standing there with that note in my hand, the next chapter wouldn't be about survival, it would be about consequence. The morning after the note appeared under my door, the air felt heavier, like the calm before something loud. I didn't rush, I didn't panic. I followed the routine I'd built on purpose: coffee, shower, breathing, grounding myself in the ordinary so fear wouldn't get a foothold. But the ordinary didn't last. By mid-morning, my phone started buzzing, not with messages, but notifications, mentions, tags, a name I hadn't searched in weeks suddenly climbing back into my awareness. His. Someone had posted about him online, not directly accusing, not naming specifics, just vague concern. Hard to watch someone you love spiral like this. When someone won't accept help, what are you supposed to do? Praying for strength during this difficult time. Difficult time. For whom? The comments filled in the gaps he'd intentionally left open. Hope she gets the support she needs. Mental health is no joke. Sending love to you both. I sat at my kitchen table, phone face down, hands wrapped around my mug. This wasn't random. This was coordinated. A soft launch of a story designed to sound compassionate while quietly stripping me of credibility. He wasn't saying I was dangerous. He was saying I was unstable. And people believed it because he had always been so calm, so articulate, so convincing. I forwarded screenshots to my lawyer. Her reply came fast. Do not respond. Let him keep talking. That was the hardest part. Every instinct in me wanted to correct the record, to scream, to explain, to tell my side. But I'd learned something crucial over the past weeks. Reacting too soon gives manipulators exactly what they want, a moving target they can reframe. By early afternoon, my sister called. He contacted Mom. That one hit differently. "What did he say?" I asked. "He told her he's worried about you, that you've changed, that you're being influenced by someone and shutting people out." My jaw tightened. Did she believe him? There was a pause. She didn't dismiss it. I closed my eyes. This was the most dangerous part of escalation, not public perception, but private doubt, when the people who know you best start questioning their own memories. That evening, I received a formal email, a request for mediation. From him? He wrote, "I think it would be healthy to have a neutral third party help us communicate before things get misunderstood." Neutral, as if the last few weeks hadn't been a masterclass in manipulation. I forwarded it to my lawyer, too. She replied with one sentence, "This is bait." And then she added something else. "Because the board has advanced their review, he's about to lose something he can't talk his way out of." That's when I felt it again, the shift again, not fear, pressure, the kind that builds right before someone makes a mistake. That night, as I locked my door and turned off the lights, my phone buzzed one last time, a message from an unknown number. No greeting, no explanation, just this: "If you don't agree to mediation, I'll make sure everyone knows what you're really like." I stared at the screen, my heartbeat steady, my hands still. Because for the first time, the threat was no longer implied, it was explicit. And that meant something critical had changed. He wasn't trying to manage the story anymore. He was trying to intimidate me into silence. And standing there in the dark, phone glowing in my hand, I realized the next step wouldn't be subtle. It would be public. And once it happened, there would be no going back for either of us. I slept with my phone on the nightstand, face down, volume on, not because I expected an emergency, but because I was done being caught off guard. Control loses its power when you stop flinching. The next morning, the fallout arrived right on schedule. I woke to missed calls, emails, a voicemail from my mother asking if we could just talk, a message from a coworker saying leadership wanted to check in again. Not urgent, but careful, like they were handling something fragile. Like me. I showered, dressed, and ate breakfast anyway. I refused to let his narrative rearrange my day. By the time I reached my office, the air felt different. Not hostile, watchful. Conversations paused when I walked by. Smiles lingered a second too long. People were measuring me against something they hadn't heard directly, but had absorbed through implication. That's how reputations erode, not with accusations, but with pauses. At noon, HR called me in again. This time, my lawyer joined by phone. The HR director folded her hands. "We've received some concerns." "I expected that," I said calmly. She blinked. "You did?" "Yes," I replied, because a pattern of indirect destabilization began after I disengaged from my husband. Silence. My lawyer spoke then. "We've documented third-party contact, false welfare checks, public insinuations, and now intimidation. If this continues, it crosses into retaliation." The word landed heavy in the room. The director nodded slowly. "Thank you for clarifying." When the meeting ended, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt resolved, because the truth no longer lived only in my body. It was on paper, in systems, with witnesses. That afternoon, the licensing board called, not to question me, to inform me. "The review has advanced," the woman said. "Your husband has been named in a formal complaint for coercive influence and boundary exploitation." I closed my eyes. Not from relief, but from the weight of finality. "Additionally," she continued, "we've received corroborating statements." Plural. He wasn't alone in this anymore. When I hung up, I sat quietly at my desk, hands folded, breathing steady. This was the moment manipulators fear most, not exposure, but confirmation. The confirmation that the story they controlled is no longer theirs to edit. That evening it went public. A post, longer this time, less vague. He didn't name me directly. He didn't have to. He wrote about betrayal, about being abandoned during personal growth, about how some people weaponize professional authority and outsiders to rewrite history. The comments were split now. Some still believed him, others didn't. A few asked questions he couldn't answer cleanly, and that's when I realized something critical. I didn't need to speak. The silence he once used against me was now exposing him. At 9:47 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. His voice cracked the moment I said hello. "This is getting out of hand. You're letting people think things that aren't true." I didn't raise my voice. "I'm not letting anything happen. I'm not participating." "You're ruining my life," he hissed. "No," I replied evenly. "I'm stepping out of it." A pause, then anger. "You think you're untouchable now?" I took a breath. "I think I'm done being reachable." "I tried to be civil." "So did I said, "for years." He laughed bitterly. "You really think this ends well for you?" I thought about the living room, the therapist standing up, the note under my door, the welfare check, the threats. "I think it already has," I said. I hung up, blocked the number, and for the first time since this began, I didn't feel braced for impact. I felt grounded, because the final stage of manipulation isn't rage, it's desperation, and desperation makes people careless. Whatever he did next wouldn't be controlled, it would be exposed. The morning after that call, I woke up lighter, and that's how I knew something else was coming. Calm like that never arrives without consequence. It's the stillness before a structure finally collapses. By mid-morning, my lawyer called. "She filed a formal complaint," she said. I closed my eyes. "Against me?" "Yes," she replied, alleging emotional abandonment, reputational harm, and professional interference. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. This was the final card in his deck, the move men like him make when persuasion fails and intimidation backfires. "He thinks if he escalates first," she continued, "he can frame you as retaliatory." "And?" I asked. "And," she said calmly, "his complaint contradicts his previous statements, in writing, to multiple entities." There it was, the mistake. Within hours, emails began circulating, quietly, internally, among people who knew how to read between lines. The therapist's documentation, the licensing board's findings, HR's timelines, his public posts, his private threats. They didn't align. The story cracked. That afternoon, I received another call, this time from someone I didn't expect, a colleague of his, someone high enough to know things. "I'm calling unofficially," the voice said, "but I want you to know what's happening is bigger than you realized." My spine straightened. "How so?" "There are concerns about how he's used influence in other relationships. Yours isn't the first name attached to a pattern." Pattern, that word again. By evening, the complaint he filed began unraveling, not dismissed, but questioned, requests for clarification, documentation, consistency. He couldn't provide it, because truth doesn't require rehearsal. That night, my phone buzzed with a notification I hadn't expected. A public statement, not from him, from the board. Carefully worded, professional, neutral, but unmistakable. An investigation had been opened into ethical violations involving coercive dynamics and abuse of influence. No names, no drama, just accountability. I sat on my couch in silence, phone resting in my palm, heart steady. This was the moment I'd imagined would feel victorious. It didn't. It felt complete. An hour later, my phone rang again. Him. A new number. I answered. "You didn't have to do this," he said, voice thin. "You could have just talked to me." I didn't interrupt. "I'm losing everything," he continued. "People are turning on me." "No," I said softly. "People are seeing you." Silence. "You wanted a reaction. You wanted me emotional, defensive, loud." His breath hitched. I chose clarity instead. His voice dropped. "You think you're better than me now?" I paused. "I think I'm free." The line went dead. I didn't block the number this time. I didn't need to, because the difference between then and now was simple. He could still speak, but he no longer controlled who listened. And as I set my phone down and stood up to turn off the lights, I realized something profound. This story didn't end when he was exposed. It ended when I stopped needing him to understand what he'd done. The last illusion of power had fallen, but consequences were just beginning. The fallout didn't arrive loudly. It arrived methodically, one quiet confirmation at a time. An email here, a phone call there, systems doing what systems do when enough evidence stacks up and no one can spin it anymore. 2 days after the board statement, my lawyer called again. "They've placed him on administrative suspension," she said. I closed my eyes, not in celebration, not in relief, just acknowledgement. "And the complaint he filed against you," she continued, "withdrawn." Of course it was, because once scrutiny turns outward, manipulators retreat, not out of remorse, but out of self-preservation. That afternoon, I received something unexpected, an apology, not from him, from people who had doubted me. A former coworker messaged, "I'm sorry I questioned you." A family member admitted, "I didn't realize how carefully he framed things." Even my mother, voice trembling, said, "I should have trusted what you felt." I listened, I accepted. I didn't revisit the past, because healing isn't about proving how right you were. It's about no longer needing to. I saw his name less and less online, posts deleted, accounts quiet, friends distancing themselves without announcement, the soft social disappearance that happens when charm can't outrun consequence. One evening, weeks later, I ran into the therapist again, by coincidence, not design. A coffee shop, a shared pause at the counter. She smiled gently. "You look settled." "I feel that way," I replied. She nodded. "That's what happens when truth stops being something you carry alone." We talked briefly, nothing dramatic, nothing heavy, and when we parted, I realized something else had shifted. I no longer needed witnesses. The power he once had came from secrecy, mine and his, and secrecy had evaporated. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I thought about the woman I'd been when I walked into that living room and heard myself being reduced to a punchline. She thought silence was survival. She hadn't yet learned that silence, when chosen, can also be sovereignty. My phone buzzed once more. A final message. From him. No accusations, no threats, no manipulation. Just one sentence. "I never thought you'd walk away without breaking." I stared at it for a moment, then I deleted it. Because breaking would have been easier. Breaking would have kept me connected to him. I didn't break. I detached. And that was the one outcome he never prepared for. As I turned off the lights and went to bed, I felt something rare and steady settle into my chest. Not triumph, not revenge. Peace. And I knew the story people would tell about this wouldn't be the one he rehearsed. It would be the one that unfolded naturally. Because the most devastating exposure isn't humiliation. It's being seen clearly and losing access forever. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was intentional, earned, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed and the ground finally knows it's safe to settle again. Weeks went by. Then months. My life didn't snap into some dramatic new version of happiness. It softened instead, smoothed at the edges. The tension I had lived with for so long slowly drained from my body, like I'd been clenching my jaw for years and only just realized I could release it. I moved into my own place, smaller than the one I shared with him, but it was mine. Every decision inside it belonged to me. The furniture, the lighting, the silence, especially the silence. At work, something unexpected happened. Without the constant background noise of doubt and distraction, I thrived. My focus sharpened, my confidence deepened. People didn't just listen to me, they sought me out, not because of what I'd survived, but because of how clearly I spoke now. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the elevator mirror. I almost didn't recognize her, not because she looked different, but because she looked at ease, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady, no apology living in her posture. That's when it hit me. I hadn't just left a marriage, I had left a version of myself that believed love required endurance. News about him faded into irrelevance. I heard things secondhand, career stalled, reputation quietly damaged, people keeping their distance, not dramatically, just enough to matter. And I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no bitterness, no urge to check. That's how I knew I was free. Healing didn't arrive as fireworks or closure conversations or final confrontations. It arrived as indifference, as peace, as mornings where my first thought wasn't about protecting myself from someone else's moods. I thought back to that night, the living room, the couch, the moment he expected me to fall apart. He thought power lived in reaction. He never imagined it could live in restraint. The most powerful thing I ever did wasn't exposing him publicly or demanding accountability or even walking away. It was choosing not to shrink when the truth stood beside me. It was letting clarity speak louder than emotion. It was understanding that when someone shows you who they are, especially in front of a witness, you don't argue, you leave. And you build a life so full, so grounded, so honest that they never get access to you again. That's the ending he never planned for, and the beginning I finally deserved. If you learned something new from my life story, please like this video, subscribe to join our community for more stories like mine, and comment down below where you're watching this video from. I'd truly love to know.